All right. Hello, everyone. I am live. Let me make sure that I can see. Um, Let me make sure we're broadcasting to YouTube. Let's see. Yep. Well, two people are watching, so it looks like we are. And I want to thank those of you who have liked the stream thus far. All right, everyone. Oh, let me share this over on my original channel, so people over there know that this is taking place. Okay. All right. So that's been shared, and I also liked it over there. So I'm gonna play the intro, everyone. My guest is backstage, and then I will bring him up, and we'll have a Q&A, and we're gonna talk about biodiesel fuels, and an interesting study that was done um, discussing the benefits of biodiesel fuels in specific localities and environments. So I'll see you on the other side of the intro. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology. First of all, please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to the channel, especially if you're new and if the algorithm brought you here or if something brought you here. Salchi, yes, this is a Dr. Dunbar early afternoon special. I'm off today, so uh, I have time to interview my guest today. We've been talking about doing this for the last couple of weeks, and our schedules just kind of lined up, and here we are. So everyone, first of all, if you want to make a donation to the channel, that information is here. Um, that information is here. So a couple of weeks ago, geez, probably more than that. This time seems to be flying by really, really fast. I attended the Greater Washington Clean Cities Coalition annual conference in Washington, D.C. And some of the key subject matters were electric vehicles and alternative fuels. And my guest um, sat on a panel and he talked about something called the Trinity Study, and which we're going to talk about. And it involved biodiesel fuels and uh, the health benefits of biodiesel fuels versus standard petroleum diesel. I thought this would be interesting for my channel. This is a science and technology channel, and I kind of want to open the channel up to other areas. And this is an area I don't know a lot about. I've heard biodiesel a lot recently, along with electric cars and just alternatives to petroleum products. So I went to Floyd after his talk and asked him if he'd be willing to come and talk about it, and he said that he would. And so, with that, everyone, I have with me today Mr. Floyd Vergara, the director of the state government affairs at Clean Fuels. If I jumbled that up somehow, he'll let me know. But I'm going to welcome up Floyd right now. Hello, Floyd. Welcome.
Hi, Anwar. Great to be here. Really appreciate the invitation.
Okay. Did I get that correctly? That was on your LinkedIn, Director of State Governmental Affairs at Clean Fuels.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I have some questions here. You saw them. So first of all, thank you for coming to my channel and your willingness to talk to my audience. We met at the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Before we talk about what you presented at the meeting, can you say a few words about yourself? From your title, it looks like you have a law background. Is that true? If so, how did you get involved in this particular area?
Yeah. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's very refreshing having a science background as well as a legal background to speak to a person of science. I don't often get to do that in my line of work. So I enjoy those sort of conversations. In terms of my background, it's a little bit backwards. I do have a legal law license, but I actually started out in science and engineering. So I got my undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. And then later in my career, I went back to law school, got my degree, and practiced law for a number of years, then went into management. So after graduating from Berkeley, I got a job briefly with the petroleum industry in the Bay Area. Decided that was not the life for me. I had actually interviewed with the California Air Resources Board while I was in college. A job opened up, and so I went after that. Started off as an engineer doing engineering work in support of rulemakings at CARB. Did that probably about the first third of my career. Then, as I said, I decided to go back to law school, got my law degree and license, practiced in the Office of Legal Affairs there. And then I went into management and leadership positions at CARB, where I oversaw a number of the key climate and air pollution programs there, including the low carbon fuel standard, some of our waste-based and energy programs and so forth. And that was 3 years ago. And then I I joined what was then the National Biodiesel Board, currently rebranded into the Clean Fuels Alliance America. The reason why we rebranded is, we started off several decades ago, started by a number of soybean farmers who are looking for a market for what was then basically waste oil that was coming out of the soybean complex. They wanted to find a market for that. They developed biodiesel, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Over the years, our producers and our members have grown more diverse. And so now we represent not only biodiesel producers and soybean farmers, but we also represent renewable diesel producers. And I can talk a little bit about the difference between those two. And recently, we've been representing the only domestic producer of sustainable aviation fuel. The common thread between those three types of fuels is the use of the feedstocks, predominantly waste oil and lipids. So those are used cooking oil, rendered tallow, distillers corn oil from the ethanol production process. And there's also some co-produced feedstocks made from soybean production and canola production. In the future, we're looking at cover crops as a potential feedstock as well.
Okay, so you mentioned CARB. That was a CARB. That was in organization.
Yes, CARB is the what many consider to be the preeminent environmental regulatory agency, definitely in the United States. At the state level, if not internationally. So that's the California Air Resources Board. They oversee air pollution and climate programs in California, provide a lot of leadership in terms of the climate programs. And those are emulated to a large degree by other states on the West Coast. New York and the Northeast are looking very closely at implementing some similar programs. They work closely with Canadians and other sort of countries in Europe and Asia and so forth.
Okay.
So I served with them for 32 years.
Okay. Now, you said a lot there. Now, was that all your transition into the clean, the clean air and the clean fuels space?
Yeah. So, CARB is all about clean air, and then, more recently about climate. So since I started 32 years ago, pretty much my entire adult life has been focused on clean air programs. And then the latter third of my career there was focused on climate programs. It's not a coincidence that they overlap. For example, climate, the biggest contributor in California and many other states to greenhouse gas emissions is from transportation. And of course, the transportation sources largely use petroleum fuels. Until recently, they've been using a lot of petroleum fuels. Those are taken out of the ground, combusted, and produce new carbon emissions that then exacerbate the greenhouse gas and climate issues. So I've been working with fuels for a long time at CARB, and also the past 3 years at Clean Fuels Alliance.
Okay. I think this is a good time to show this to everyone for context. I did some quick research before this discussion on what biodiesel is. Not everybody knows what that is or the significance of it. So I'm going to throw this cartoon up. It's actually the background right there, Floyd, and you can correct me. Oh, please do correct me if I misspeak or if I misinterpret this. I just pulled this off of Google. So you have that says not all fuels are alike. And over there on the right, you have petroleum fuel, which comes from petroleum products. You're drilling fossil fuels out of the ground, and you're combusting them in car engines and diesel engines, and I believe jet engines. And then on the other side, you have the biofuels, which it looks like those come from plant products, and they can be used for the same things.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a great infographic, and if I can just kind of walk your readers through this. So as I mentioned, traditionally, the transportation sector has been fueled by petroleum fuel, and this is fuel developed from crude oil, which is extracted from the ground. That crude oil was sequestered carbon over millions of years. So as far as the atmosphere is concerned, when you refine that into fuel and then combust it, it is new carbon that then contributes to that CO2 and other sort of greenhouse gases, or carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, contribute to climate change. And as this graphic illustrates, transportation, both light duty passenger vehicles and also medium and heavy duty transport vehicles are the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions. In California, they consider, when you include the refining sector, the transportation sector accounts for about 50% of the state's anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So single biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. And then on the right here, you see biofuels, and the important difference. And as you pointed out, biofuels, by and large, are drop-in replacements for petroleum diesel. And your readers might wonder, well, aren't they also combusting it? That's true. They're combusting it. They're providing that energy source to move the vehicles. But the big difference is that you're not taking sequestered carbon that's been sequestered over millions of years and then reintroducing that into the atmosphere. Instead, for biofuels, you're basically taking, relatively real time this season and perhaps last season, carbon that was taken up by the plant during its growth, and then converting that to fuel, either directly to fuel or as lipids and fats and greases, and then they get used up as restaurant cooking oil. They get taken up by animals at the farm. When they are butchered and rendered, that fat gets turned into fuel and so forth. And so that is, you're basically recycling the carbon dioxide that was taken up by the plant, and then using that gets emitted as part of the process. So there's a net zero carbon emissions from that process. And the only carbon emissions left, which is why biofuels reduce greenhouse gases so much, is the residual amount of energy that's required to make that fuel. So that's in the production and marketing process. But the bulk of the greenhouse gases is, 70% or more comes from that recycled carbon dioxide that the plants take up as they grow.
Okay, so I think I'm going to try to piece this together for the audience. So I think the connection that I made is that when you're dealing with the petroleum products, those have been out of the biosphere for a long time,
Yes.
and a balance has basically been achieved with the environment and those petroleum products. And when we combust them, when we drill them, we combust them, we're putting all these petroleum, all these carbon, all this carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. That so everything's going out of balance. But with the biofuels, they're already there, so their use is not disturbing that balance.
That is exactly right. I mean, you're exactly on point there. Yeah, you're disturbing the equilibrium that has been achieved over millennia by reintroducing billions of tons of carbon dioxide that's coming from a source that the atmosphere has not seen for millions of years. And so that is, disturbing that equilibrium, whereas plant-based biofuels is already part of that cycle, and it's recycling that carbon dioxide through the growth process. And really what you're ending up with is a what's been calculated by Argonne and EPA as a 74% on average reduction in greenhouse gases relative to petroleum. And this is for our diesel substitute. So this is biodiesel and renewable diesel. So 74% on average GHG reduction. It could be upwards of 80s or even low 90s, depending on which feedstock you use. So as you can see there, that's a very significant reduction in greenhouse gases. The other part of it is I touched on it earlier. These fuels, both biodiesel and renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuels, they are drop-in fuels, right? And what I mean by drop-in is you could put them into existing internal combustion engines and use them tomorrow. You don't need billions of dollars of new infrastructure. You don't need to re-engineer your vehicle or your engines. It's literally a drop-in fuel. And where that's important is there's kind of this lag between where we are now and where policymakers and regulators want to be. You mentioned electrification earlier. That's going to take decades, if not more. And in the meantime, you could be foregoing significant carbon reductions in that space. And that's where fuels that are drop-in can be really beneficial for the environment and for public health. You can use them, fleets, for example, can go 100% sustainable using blends of renewable diesel and biodiesel tomorrow. These fuels are available now in commercial scale, and so they can get those reductions and they can improve their environmental scores and get those important greenhouse gas reductions for the many years it'll take for electrification to come online.
Okay, so the concept of drop-in, so you're saying these are things that can be used right now. They don't have to be extracted from the ground and processed and refined. And as you just said, with the electrical infrastructure, that's going to take time to implement. So these are things that we could utilize right now.
Yeah, I mean, we biodiesel and renewable diesel right now is a over 3 billion gallon market in the U.S. We project that would grow to 6 billion gallons by 2030. And in fact, we think that'll happen a number of years before then. And with the right policy signals and the right innovations, we think that could grow to 15 billion gallons by 2050. And those are not, pie in the sky projections. Let me just give you an example. So in California, we have this program called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, which sends a strong market signal for innovations in fuels in the transportation sector. And what that has done for the heavy duty sector, so this is freight transport, construction equipment, and so forth, both on-road and off-road. We started out with 14 million gallons in 2011. Fast forward to 2021, that has grown to 1.23 billion gallons, right? So several orders of magnitude growth. And that's important because our fuels operate in the medium to heavy duty sector, which is the most difficult to, among the most difficult to electrify sectors out there. So electrification on light duty side of things makes a lot of sense. You see that growth happening with Teslas and Hyundais and so forth. Many models coming out. Makes a lot of sense there. On the medium and heavy duty side of things, very challenging. There's going to be some applications there where it makes sense to electrify. So these are going to be your kind of return to base, closed route, sort of applications, last mile delivery sort of applications. But the most significant challenges are going to be in your long distance, long haul sort of applications. Very large Class 7, Class 8 engines. Very challenging to get sufficient electricity or electric power stored on those vehicles, plus the infrastructure to charge those. So that's going to take many, many years. Even California's projections show a significant or dominant internal combustion engine presence through 2050 and beyond.
Okay, it sounds like, well, I'm hearing all these murmurings about how petroleum diesel, because of what's going on, it's going to go way up. Sounds like this is something we could use right now. As far as is this are biodiesel fuels, are these commercially available right at the gas station, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, my local gas station, a couple of blocks from me, offers 95% or more biomass-based diesel. So biomass-based diesel is kind of the collective term we use to describe biodiesel and renewable diesel collectively. So yeah, the pump is effectively offering, close to, if not 100%, biodiesel renewable diesel blends. And I promised I would, I would explain just briefly what the difference is between those two. So biodiesel is an oxygenated fuel that's a replacement for petroleum diesel. It's produced by taking a lipid feedstock like fats, oils, and greases, and undergoing a catalytic chemical process called transesterification. And that uses some sort of alcohol, typically ethanol, or I'm sorry, methanol. And the end result is you get an oxygenated fuel called biodiesel with fatty acid methyl esters. You get a side product called, glycerin, which is used in soap production, personal care products. And that biodiesel can be used in heavy duty vehicles. And then renewable diesel is essentially the same, uses the same feedstocks, but it undergoes what is effectively a petroleum refining process. So you end up with a very similar product, chemically similar to fossil diesel, but it's made from bio feedstocks. And so you can take those two fuels, use them in heavy duty diesel engines. You can blend them. You would blend them for a number of reasons, right? They're complementary fuels. Biodiesel produces, complements properties that renewable diesel may be short on, and biodiesel tends to be a little bit cheaper. So on an economic standpoint, many users want to maximize the amount of biodiesel just for the optimizing that price point. But both fuels can be used in vehicles and fleets right now. A lot of fleets are using high renewable diesel, biodiesel blends to lower their environmental footprint and improve their bottom lines as well.
Okay. All right. Before we jump into the Trinity study, I just have my own question about the California, the state governmental affairs at Clean Fuels. Is that, because I've heard California is almost its own little country.
That it is.
Is that California's own agency for, look at the name again, for alternative fuels and these types of things?
Okay, so let me just clarify. So CARB, the California Air Resources Board, is a government agency.
Yes.
They're part of the California Environmental Protection Agency. That's the agency I used to work for. Now I'm working for Clean Fuels Alliance America. We're the national trade association representing biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuels, the domestic industry. So our members we're a nonprofit trade association. Our members include farmers, fuel producers, marketers, technology providers, and so forth. So we represent, the producers and the farmers who make these fuels, and our fuels operate predominantly in the medium and heavy duty sector. So we don't really deal with light duty passenger vehicles and so forth. So my job as the Director of State Government Affairs I oversee our efforts in all 50 states. We work hard to inform and educate policymakers to make sure that they fully understand both the benefits of our fuels as well as the need to take a holistic look at all of the different options that are available for addressing climate change. Many states are aggressively looking at climate change. A number of them are focused almost solely on electrification, and I think it's important to make sure that they are fully aware of all the benefits of being able to address greenhouse gas emissions immediately through drop-in fuels like biodiesel and renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. Because as I said, a number of the efforts that the states are pursuing are going to take many, many years in order to make a meaningful dent in the current situation. And in the meantime, I consider ourselves kind of a low-hanging fruit. I mean, these are fuels that are available at commercial scale. Like I said, they're available now. Truckers and off-road equipment users can use them now, and so with the right policy signals, we can really make a big difference in the climate picture.
Okay. All right. Well, now let's talk about what you all have discovered about biodiesel and health effects.
Great.
So let's talk about the Trinity study.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I worked at CARB for a number of years, and part of my work there was I was the state representative on what we call the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee for 2 years. And we went around the state, engaged with environmental justice residents, community residents, seeking their input, and and kind of converging with that experience was my experience with fuels, having worked in the fuels program at CARB. And so when I came over to Clean Fuels Alliance America, the opportunity came up to study and further quantify the benefits and impacts of our fuels in the heavy duty sector. And so I took that opportunity to take a look at what the literature said. And if you look at the literature on diesel PM reductions, there's a lot of literature that talks about the ability of biodiesel and renewable diesel to get significant reductions, not just in greenhouse gases, but also in particulate matter. And that's important from a human health standpoint, but particularly for environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, because they are so disproportionately exposed to high levels of air pollution. So the ability to be able to get significant reductions in diesel PM was of keen interest to me personally. And so when you look at the literature, you see a lot of literature talks about the ability of these fuels replacing fossil diesel and getting significant reductions, but those results are often expressed, almost exclusively expressed in terms of percent reductions, which is fine if you're a regulator and policy wonk, that's the sort of language we speak. But if you're living in one of these communities, you don't really, when I discussed this with folks as we went around the state, what they were looking for was meaningful information that they could use, not just in their day-to-day decision making, but also so they could have meaningful conversations with policymakers and regulators in terms of what can be done now to help protect my health and my children's health. So percent reductions wasn't really serving that need. So what we wanted to do with this study was specifically address that deficit, right? We wanted to take a look at high diesel use sites around the country, do the sort of rigorous air dispersion modeling and health risk assessments that you talked about, using standard EPA models both for the for the air dispersion and health risk assessment, but also placing a value on those reductions. So EPA has different models, AirMod, other sort of tools for quantifying how pollutants get dispersed in a community. And they also have a valuation protocol called BenMap, which then assigns each of those pollutant reductions a dollar value based on their own studies. So we wanted to take this approach, which, in our look at the literature, really wasn't done at a neighborhood level. And that's kind of one of the innovative and groundbreaking aspects of this study, is that most of the studies that had been done along these lines really looked at kind of a higher statewide, regional, much larger, more spread out geographical basis. What we wanted to do was drill down to the neighborhood level and census tract level. So we wanted to do a study at that level using, standardized air dispersion modeling coupled with health risk assessments, really get a sense for what the neighbors and residents are seeing and experiencing at that level. So over 2 phases of the study, we have evaluated 28 different sites across the country, West Coast, East Coast, Southwest, Colorado, Midwest sites, and also District of Columbia, as well as a number of states on the Mid-Atlantic. And so there are 28 of these sites. We focused on transportation, and this specifically are the older legacy heavy-duty trucks that don't have a lot of pollution controls. And there's large numbers of these used at ports, rail yards, agricultural operations, logistics facilities. Amazon has been growing like weeds all over the country. And, if you've seen some of these very large warehouse centers, they have a lot of heavy duty trucks going through and idling for very long times. And unfortunately, they are also very close to residential communities. So focused on logistics, rail yards, and freight corridors, especially along multimodal facilities and ports, where they are servicing the ships that are coming in and taking them out to, logistics facilities and distributing those goods to the rest of the country. And on the East Coast, we did an analysis on the heating oil market. Heating oil is a very large market in that part of the country. Billions of gallons worth of fossil distillate is used. So we wanted to see what sort of benefits could be achieved by switching those over to biodiesel. So the study basically posed a very simple question, right? If you took the 100% fossil diesel used at these sites and then replaced them with 100% biodiesel, what would the result look like for a person living close by? And what I mean by close by is within 5 to 7 mile radius of that site. And the reason we looked at 100% biodiesel is, from the literature, biodiesel has the most ability to reduce particulate matter, even more so than renewable diesel. So we wanted to focus on that to see what, kind of as a bounding exercise, to see what is the maximum amount of diesel particulate matter that could be achieved through this policy switch. The sites were also selected in terms of not only the states that were aggressively pursuing climate change, because that's where our fuels are operating the most, but also we wanted to map it back to the American Lung Association's State of the Air report. So they produce this report annually, identifying kind of the top 20, top 25 cities that are worst for exposure to a variety of pollutants. And so they have each year they produce a list of cities that are the worst places to live if you don't want to be exposed to particulate matter. And so we wanted to make sure a number of our sites map back to those, to that list of cities. And so we have this 2 phases of the study looking at these sites, and we can talk about the results. I'll pause here for any questions.
So Floyd, I forgot to tell you this before we started. There's a way, if you have something, and actually I can share, but if you have something you specifically want to share, I think there's a button there where you can ask to have the screen.
I'm glad you asked me that because I was wondering that. Let me see if I could. It's the present button. Is that
I
the
believe
idea?
so, yeah. And
Yeah.
I should see something here.
Okay, so let me see if I can pull that up. PowerPoint, yes. Let's see. Upload file. Let's see if I can. I was hoping to just pull it up because it's on my screen, but it looks like I have to upload a file here. All right. What happened to it?
Yeah, I believe that there's a button when you're the guest. There's a button there that when you hit share, I'll see a prompt for me to yield the screen to you.
Okay. Looks like it's uploading a recent slide deck that we use, and it included District of Columbia. So I hope it's not too large a file. I tried to keep there.
Okay, there it is. Okay.
Right.
So, okay, well, I'll add it to the stream.
Great.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so we've already touched on a number of these things, including the study question. And the important thing here is that this distinguishes it from previous studies, where this study actually did a bottom-up sort of analysis as opposed to a top-down. And what I mean by top-down is an analysis that starts off at a very wide geographic range, and the bottom-up is aimed at looking at what's happening at the neighborhood level. The top-down analysis is very quick, very relatively straightforward to do, but it doesn't give you that granularity that is going to be helpful if you're actually living in these communities. It gives you more of a kind of an average Joe result. So the bottom-up is going to give you that greatest resolution and granularity, but it's very complex and very time and resource intensive. So you can only do so many of these things. So that's one aspect of the study that's innovative and groundbreaking. The other part of it is just the sheer scope. As I said, we've looked at 28 sites over 21 states. Typically, this sort of analysis, you're looking at one or two sites within a state. So a very broad look at what's going on in the country. Here's that scope of the sites that I talked about a minute ago. And then I'm not quite sure what happened to the graphic here. Okay, so here's Chicago. Oh, that's too bad. It's not showing up. There's a table of non-cancer results that's supposed to be there, but for some reason it didn't translate. So let me just walk your listeners to the way the results are presented in the report. So this slide kind of summarizes what those results are. And on the far left here, you see the baseline case, which is the 100% fossil diesel. This is for Chicago, Illinois. And we're really just looking at transportation sources. So on-road heavy duty, off-road heavy duty, that sort of thing. And, Chicago is such a complex and large site that it's broken up into two different geographic locations. So the base case shows the cancer risk expressed in colors, the red being the highest elevated, orange and yellow being lower, and green being the lowest. I'm not sure if your readers can actually see these. You can see them in the actual reports, but each one of these different geographic cells are the census tracts that are looked at individually through the computer modeling. and the numbers within them are the cancer risks, and then translated further down into cancer burden. So the numbers here are the baseline cancer risks associated with 100% fossil diesel. And on the right, you'll see what that would look like if you take all of that fossil diesel and converted it to 100% biodiesel. As you can see here, significant reduction in cancer risk, much lower cancer risks and cancer burdens. And, for most of Chicago, you would get a much reduced cancer burden. When you calculate that through the modeling, over a 70-year time frame, we would anticipate over 1,500 fewer cases from that sort of switch. And then on the right here is the non-cancer impacts from that switch. And by non-cancer, and we talked earlier about what is a useful metric for people who live in these communities. I submit to you and your listeners that a percent reduction is not going to be that useful to me if I were living there. I'm more interested in what does this mean to me, in terms of premature death, reduce asthma cases for me and my kids. How does it affect my employment in terms of sick days I need to report? And so these are the types of health endpoints that are quantified in the EPA BenMap valuation that I mentioned earlier. The ones in yellow are the 4 main drivers. There's asthma, there's minor restricted activity days. So these are the days when you were planning to, for example, do some gardening, but you've been exposed to such high levels of air pollution that it kind of changes your plans, or you were planning to go jogging around the park, but you can't do that now because of the high pollution levels. So asthma, minor restricted activity days, premature mortality. So these are premature deaths. And then work loss days. So these are the number of days you've been affected to the extent that you have to report sick to work. The reason they're yellow highlighted is these 4 metrics represent about 95% or more of the total value of these impacts. And so these other endpoints are identified as related to reductions in particulate matter, but they don't drive the results as much as the ones in yellow highlighted. So Chicago, Illinois, you can see here, there's, if you do that switch and got rid of, most of that particulate matter from fossil diesel, the modeling would suggest a reduction in premature deaths by about 83 per year. And that's as long as that reduction and as long as those legacy vehicles remain on the road, exposing the local residents there. And then on the right is what EPA would quantify these metrics in terms of dollar values, right? Sick days, over 12,500 per year. And these results are annual, whereas the cancer results are on a 70-year time frame. So over 12,500 fewer sick days reported if you make that switch. The asthma cases are very significant, over 31,600. As fewer asthma cases per year. So if I was a resident with kids, that would be a kind of an eye opener for me. And then when you add up all of these benefits, the values of the benefits according to EPA's calculation, for Chicago alone, doing that switch would amount to almost $680 million per year in avoided health costs. And so we did this with 28 different sites. Not surprisingly, the ports yielded the greatest benefits because they have the most number of, the highest volume of diesel use sites. So we looked at Port of LA and Long Beach. That's 40% of the country's goods go through that port complex on the West Coast. We also looked at Port Elizabeth in the Port of New York, New Jersey. That looks like it would result in 2,500 fewer cancer cases, nearly 75,000 fewer asthma cases per year, and so forth. $1.4 billion per year of avoided health cost benefits. And so when you look at, and I'll just skip to the national results. And here's an analysis of the heating oil that we did in New York and Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And here is we did this analysis, or Trinity Consulting, which is why it's called Trinity Studies, did the analysis around the Sotomayor housing complex, which is here in this kind of dark outlined orthogonal sort of shape there. And then what you do is you looked at that switch, quantify the baseline impacts, and then do the air dispersion modeling to see what it would look like after switching. So this is a high density housing complex using a lot of heating oil, petroleum heating oil. So if you did that analysis, you would end up with about 10 fewer cases. And you'll see that with the heating oil analysis, it's quite a bit lower volumes of distillate relative to the transportation sector. But, reducing cancers and reducing asthma and premature deaths, even at a lower level, I think is a significant bit of information that folks should know about. And on the non-cancer benefits here, you could see that switching over petroleum distillate for heating oil to biodiesel, in this case, would yield about over $130 million per year. So significant even on the heating oil side of things. And, this is the overall results, over $7 billion just for these 28 different sites, over $7 billion, almost $8 billion in avoided health costs per year, over 456,000 fewer asthma cases, and nearly 930 fewer premature deaths per year. So very significant. And then the last point here is that these are only 28 sites. There are literally dozens, if not more, similar sites across the country that we didn't look at. And so this is, literally your kind of tip of the iceberg sort of result. And we really think that this is important for policymakers as well as the residents to have a better understanding of what they could be achieving and what they might be foregoing with a focus on single technology solutions.
Okay. So I want to go back. So it sounds like the toxic. I have a pharmacology and a toxicology background, so the toxic moiety is the particulate matter. Is that the main?
It's particulate matter, but also the characteristics of that particulate matter. So diesel particulate matter was identified by California as a toxic air contaminant, formally recognized as a toxic air contaminant. So these are among the worst of the worst sort of air pollutants. Back in, I believe, the late 90s. And so there's been a very concerted effort in California and other states and by EPA to reduce diesel PM. So these are different. I mean, if you take the same size particulate, one came from a diesel, fossil diesel combustion, and the other one came from dust, for example, and they're both similar size. They'll both be harmful, but diesel PM is particularly harmful and causes a range of very bad sort of health outcomes. And so the ability of biodiesel and renewable diesel to reduce significantly that diesel particulate matter, especially in transportation, these fuels can reduce PM production by 50% or more. California did some studies that showed, depending on the case, you could get 70% plus diesel PM reduction using biodiesel and renewable diesel. So we think that's an important bit of information that's missing from the conversations that are happening. right now. So
Okay, so that's interesting. So the petroleum products give rise to these particular, sorry, they give rise to this particulate matter, and the biodiesel doesn't,
that's right.
or lesser of it.
It's lesser of it, and it doesn't have the same constituents that fossil diesel particulate has. So as you know, fossil products, petroleum products, contain a range of different chemical constituents. The ones of particular concern would be in the BTEX range, benzene, toluene, xylene. There is a range of polyaromatic hydrocarbons that are also particularly toxic. There's a whole host of, I can't remember the exact number, but there were literally dozens of constituents that comprise diesel PM that are of health concern to California and other regulators. And so you get a substantial reduction of those, if not complete elimination. The feedstocks that go into biodiesel and renewable diesel have virtually zero BTEX constituents in there. So you're not going to get that part of it, coming out of the tailpipe, for example.
So you said BTEX or VTEX?
BTEX. So benzene, toluene, xylene. That's kind of the shorthand for that family of chemicals. So these are the aromatic compounds that have a ring shape, and you attach different chemical groups to them, and that ring shape has a particularly bad impact on human health.
Okay, I imagine it's because of the resonance structure, it's reactive with macromolecules.
Now you're getting into an area.
Okay, I have a background in inhalation toxicology, and I'm trying to piece this together. And when I think about particulate matter, I'm thinking about something getting in and depositing the respiratory.
I think what you're touching on is the physical characteristics of very fine particulates.
Yes.
Facilitate their penetration deep into lung tissue, but then the chemical constituents of that particulate matter actually make a difference. So highly toxic particulate matter can have much greater impacts. So diesel PM is it's considered in California to I think the current estimate is it's about 70% of the overall toxic risk to air exposure in California. So despite the significant efforts that's been expended by the state, you still have a significant risk due to exposure to diesel PM.
Okay. All right, we are just about at an hour. I want to be mindful of your time, Floyd.
I can spend a little bit more time if you have questions, especially from your audience.
Okay. If you all have any questions, Floyd just said he'll field some. I have about two more.
Okay.
Based upon which you described in the study. First, I want to thank Salchi for the Cash App donation. Thank you very much. So, okay, so you guys modeled the study involved modeling. So you guys modeled that the use of the biodiesel fuel will greatly decrease these adverse health effects. Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there a stakeholder that you're hoping this will go in front of, and they'll say, and the light bulb will turn on and say, oh yeah, we'll use more biodiesel? Who needs to see this?
Great question. A lot of different stakeholders need to see this, to be frank. We are, of course, working very diligently trying to educate the policymakers and regulators on these considerations. They're the ones making decisions on what sort of programs to implement. But on the other side of things, there are important stakeholders as well, right? The fleet operators that are using fuels when they're making decisions as to on a, environmental governance sort of aspect, what sort of strategies might they pursue, both near term and long term? So immediate drop-in fuels like biodiesel and renewable diesel, I think should be part of that consideration. Those are things that the fleets can do now to make significant inroads on their both their carbon and kind of good neighbor index. And then there are the folks who are living in these communities. It kind of saddens me to see a number of them heavily focused on particular single strategies without realizing, or maybe they're kind of intentionally ignoring the amount of time it takes for those sort of strategies to be deployed at meaningful levels in their communities. I've seen communities push for example, and none of this is meant to bash electrification efforts. We think my organization thinks that electrification is a very important part of any rational carbon reduction strategy. It has to be. But part of that conversation also has to include other sort of holistic and strategies, right? I mean, we all know it's going to take many, many years for some of these strategies to deploy, especially in very difficult to electrify sectors. For example, electric heavy duty trucks, right? Even California's own projections show that, there's going to be a predominant presence of internal combustion engines in those vehicles well beyond 2045 and 2050. So the question that really begs is, what can you do now to clean up that fuel as much as possible while these other efforts are taking fruit? So I think that's part of the conversation. If I were living in these communities, I would want to know what can be done both here now and years down the road. Am I willing to sacrifice, thousands of cases of asthma that I could prevent or reduce for the chance to get one, $500,000 electric truck in my neighborhood, which replaces only one truck, not the 10 others that are internal combustion powered? I would think that would be a significant part of my calculus. So we're definitely looking to educate folks, make sure that they understand, what's available out there in terms of strategies.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to that one graphic that you showed, that the red was most intense right there on the lake. And as you were talking just now, I was thinking that, unfortunately, if you're, I don't want to be controversial, but if you're talking about a community, communities of color, then I would think they're less likely to understand the science, as you described, outside of the initial, oh, my son has asthma, can you give him an inhaler?
Right.
They probably don't know the questions to ask and how all the science fits together.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what's happening with the focus on single technology strategies. Is it's such a complicated, as you're pointing out, it's such a complicated picture that I think it makes people seek out the simple solutions, right? The bright and shiny, the one with the most promise, that sort of thing. And what gets me is, that to me that's a disservice to the folks who live in these communities, just because it's challenging to explain that in a way that's going to be meaningful to folks, and that's part of the effort here was to try to quantify these benefits into metrics that are more relatable for everyday residents. But even though it's challenging to translate the science, that doesn't take you off the hook from that, from doing that, right? Because the folks who live in these communities deserve to know and understand what it is they're being asked to support, and are they leaving something off the table that really should be part of the table?
Okay. Now, Floyd, the other thing I just thought about was with the changing demographics of cities. I'm wondering if how that would impact some of this, because we know that the cities, some of the cities ethnically, they're reshuffling.
Hmm.
So I imagine a more a more college educated uh, populace would be better equipped to ask these type of questions and probably lobby and make demands for uh, these types of solutions. I'm just speculating here. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point. I imagine if they were open to a holistic approach to carbon reductions and air pollution reductions, they should be interested in things like this. But I don't want to downplay the importance of providing this information to you know, um, lower income communities and communities that
yep.
have a different culture or different language. I think it's important to provide them with that information. So we are undertaking efforts to translate this information into other languages that are going to be relevant and useful to folks living in these communities. And as you mentioned, the demographics are changing, and so some of these communities are going to be are going to be changing, and their needs for information are going to be changing, and so we're trying to stay ahead of that development.
Okay. I don't know if I thanked Aquateki. I don't know if I thanked you for the Cash App donation. Thank you again if I didn't do it the first time, and also thank you to Doug as well. I'm glad that um, in this live round, I think some of you guys are getting something out of this. My last statement slash question, and this will be all that I have, and I think we can wrap up shortly thereafter. After talking with Antoine Thompson and attending the conference, and your comments about electrical vehicles and infrastructure, this looks like a puzzle that has to be pieced together. It doesn't look like it's a depending on time, it doesn't look like a one size fits all approach. It looks like everything has to kind of be pieced together in the most prudent way, especially if the electrical is not going to come online for another in its entirety in another 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% on point with that. It's I think we all can better serve the residents who are suffering from disproportionate impacts to have an honest conversation and talk about things in a holistic manner, and really look at are we going down a path that takes a great amount of risk and putting all the eggs in one basket, as opposed to kind of the more historically successful approach, which is to diversify and do that comprehensive and holistic approach to solving problems, because there are a number of ways, and I'm not saying biodiesel and renewable diesel is the only solution. I'm not saying that by any means. There's going to be a role for hydrogen. There's going to be a role for electricity. There's going to be a role for renewable natural gas. So why are we not having that conversation? To some extent we are at the kind of highest levels, but we really should be having that conversation up and down. That discussion. People really need to understand kind of the benefits of all of these different types of approaches.
Okay. So everyone who's watching this, if you don't, the one thing you should take away from this is that this sector, clean fuels, electric cars, uh, what we're going to do in terms of transportation and vehicles and how those are impacting the environment. This is a big area. I mean, as I said, my backgrounds are in pharmacology and toxicology, and I'm in the regulatory sector now. So it's easy to kind of get stuck in your little silo, just looking
Hmm.
at your little piece of the STEM acronym. But this is a big area, and I appreciate you, Floyd, for coming and talking to us about this. One last question: Are to your knowledge, are other countries looking at this as well? This
Yeah, I mean, biodiesel and renewable diesel are, playing significant roles in Europe and in Asia. Other countries are, also looking at what's available, what are the tools in the toolkit, what can they, help produce domestically as opposed to having to import. So all of these things are kind of being considered. And I think you made a point earlier, and I would emphasize it. California, if it were considered its own country, would now be, I think, the fourth largest economy. I think I saw that in a headline somewhere, if not the fifth largest. They certainly have leapfrogged a couple of countries in recent years. And think about that, right? So the fifth largest economy in the world has put in literally billions of dollars into an effort that has yielded, I think, 800,000 electrified cars. So that's battery electric and plug-in hybrids. 800,000, which sounds like a lot, but
hmm
when you consider how many millions of cars, I mean, I think there's 25, 26 million cars on the road in California. 800,000 is significant, but it's a small chunk of the overall population. Put that in another context, in the sector that we operate in, medium and heavy duty sector, there's about 1.52 million vehicles in this sector, medium and heavy duty, depending on whose estimate you look at. And the millions of dollars that have been put into electrifying this sector has yielded less than 2,000. And most of those are transit buses and last mile delivery, the sort of applications that are naturally amenable to electrification. But you have 250,000 long haul heavy duty trucks that are going to be very difficult to electrify. I mean, these are 3 times the value, the cost of a standard brand new internal combustion truck. The charging infrastructure, well, so the battery packs on these trucks are about $8,000 to $15,000.
hmm
I'm sorry, 8,000 to 15,000 pounds, the battery packs alone on these trucks, in order to give them the range that's comparable to internal combustion. That's a megawatt hour level sort of battery capacity. You have to couple that with megawatt level charging infrastructure. You need tens of thousands of those to service the market. And, a few weeks ago, the governor asked electric vehicle owners not to charge their cars because of the rolling blackout situation that was coming up, and the wildfire situation. So
Wow.
I imagine that's going to be an increasing kind of normality picture in California. And so you kind of have to look at, if that's going to be the case moving forward, it's going to be that much more challenging to electrify. And as I said, I think electrification, even in that sector, has to be explored. But you need to understand there are going to be new nuances. There's dozens of different types of drive cycles and duty cycles in the heavy duty sector. Some of those are going to be much more amenable to electrification than others. And so it really begs the question of, why are folks so focused on one strategy when there are, it really has to be a complex, sophisticated conversation about what's the best way to approach that. And that's all we're trying to do with information like this.
Okay. All right. Well, Floyd, that's all I've got. Do you have any parting words or comments? And I appreciate you. Before you give those, I appreciate you coming and talking, because I realize one of the things one of the things I'm realizing with science is that everything, if it's proprietary, if it's confidential, everything can't be discussed openly.
Right.
So, and I think some of these technologies are new, so everyone can't talk about what they're doing or what they're working on. But anyway, I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate meeting you at Antoine's event a few weeks ago. Appreciate the invitation. Love to speak to you and your audience. You ask great questions. This is these sort of programs and health programs are best served in an open and transparent process, right? So with this study, there's nothing to hide. It's available on our website. So for those of your listeners who are curious, I invite them to take a look at it. My contact information is available on our website. Just take a look at it, see what it says to you. And, really what we're looking for is just a better informed consumer, better informed fleet operator, better informed community residents, because the better we all are informed, the deeper and more meaningful our conversations are going to be.
Okay, so everyone, I shared the link to the Trinity study that you shared with me, Lloyd. So that's Floyd. Sorry,
No worries.
That's in the description box below. So if you want to read about the data that Floyd showed us, um, it's an extensive file. That information is below. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Floyd. Thank you for coming. I might tap you again at some point. I
Sounds
probably
good.
will.
Sounds
All right.
good. Have a great day, Anwar.
Have a good weekend.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you to those of you who hung out and watched this. And if you're watching on the playback, please definitely leave any comments or questions below. I want this to be interactive. I want people to interact with the information, and especially if it resonates with you. Please consider joining my newsletter, the Big Words LLC Newsletter. This link is below in the description box. There's a 2-paragraph greeting. Some of you have seen this probably thousands of times. There's a 2-paragraph greeting, and there's a subscription button there. And if for some reason something happens to this this link, if something happens to this sign up form, you can also email me if you want to be added. My email address is below in the description box as well. It is Big Words LLC Newsletter at gmail.com. And with that, everyone, I'm going to wrap this up. So thank you again to Floyd. Thank you for all of you guys who hung out there in the chat. Salchi, Aquateki, Doug, everyone who stopped through. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Look out for the next one. Stay safe out there. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.